Is there anyone else on the floor that I can see a hand in the back?
Thank you very much. David Daly, the European Union Ambassador to Australia. I'd like to ask a question of the panel and just to make a point of information. The point of information first is that the European Union and Australia, we are of course now looking together at the question of the technical linkage of the Australian system with our ETS, which, as you know, covers over 30 countries in Europe. So we're examining that because the European position has been to try and have a wide and deep system of ETS linkages internationally within the OECD. But my question is, what does the panel think is the likelihood of any reversal of policy in Australia on this? Thank you.
That hot potato is thrown to me. Well, there are a number of challenges ahead, and there's a cloud of uncertainty, there's no question. There has been some considerable work. I mean, it's most likely on current prospects that we're seeing a coalition government, and there's been an emphatic statement of policy that they will repeal this legislation. But that will take time, and it could endure for a couple of years, and we could hope that there's a return to the bipartisan position on carbon pricing and constraints. I think at the end of the day that there's no getting away if parties are serious about climate change. There's no getting away from the physics of climate change and the need, as I say, recognised by the companies to constrain carbon, and the best way to do that. So it's going to be a challenging period, but I think Australia will inevitably, if not having a little pause for a while, be back in that game.
Thanks, John. We just have time for one more question. I see a hand that's just been raised, so that'll be our last question for the session. Unfortunately, we're running over time.
My name is Bernard Wheelahan. This is a question for the Ambassador. 2 years ago, the Global Foundation participated in a green energy mission to Latin America. We were immensely impressed by the performance of Brazil. As you said, sir, 80% of electricity comes from hydro, 50% of motor fuels comes from ethanol, and the wind energy business has boomed over that 2 years. Lane Crockett's made the point that here we have a problem. We don't have bipartisan support, we don't have a clear regulatory framework, and we have our fights between the states and federal government. What has Brazil done with respect to bipartisan support, clear regulatory framework, and relationship between the Federation and the states to get where they are today?
Thank you for your question. It's not an easy game. It's been something that's been done on a day-to-day basis for roughly, I would say, 40 years now, since the first oil crisis, when at that time we imported roughly 90% of our oil needs. We achieved self-sufficiency in terms of consumption, production of oil in Brazil as from 2006, because mostly of the blend of ethanol in our gasoline, in our petrol, to the tune of 25%, but our cars can run with up to 100% ethanol. Concerning the wind developments in Brazil recently, we were very much aware that we should catch up with the market in that. The thing is, our government traditionally does not subsidize the consumption of energy. So wind prices, production of electricity mostly, is still very high for us. And recently, through the bidding process that we have in Brazil, we are succeeding in producing 1 megawatt of wind energy for around $60. So it's pretty reasonable to sell it to the consumer. Another concern in Brazil on a federal level, as from the last 10 years, was implementing and enforcing a legal framework that could give consumers and the producers of energy long-term reliability and sustainability in terms of the relationship with the states and the return for the long-range and long-term investments.
Thank you, Ambassador. All right, well, I'd like to thank the panel. Could you join me in thanking the panel, please? Thank you. It's been a very interesting discussion, and for me, three of the main points have been redeveloping urban areas as well as greenfield developments, working together to realise the economic benefits of a clean, green energy sector, and also, of course, tackling the very difficult issue that we're all facing, and that is of water shortage and water pollution. So those are definitely key issues that we need to think about. And now I'll hand over to Adi.
Thank you. I think just a couple of quick observations from my perspective. What I have heard, I think, very clearly from the panel today is that it's opportunity, opportunity, opportunity when we're thinking about how we evolve as a nation and how we integrate better in the world in terms of looking at and capturing the green opportunity. I think from the Ambassador, you know, there's proof that it can be done, that there is a great opportunity to lead by example, and I think that it would be good for us to take that on board. From the good doctor, we heard about opportunities for green transport, building, recycling in an increasingly urbanised environment in China. And, you know, we're working actively with China, but, you know, there are a lot of ways to look at the positive side of how we can start to capture that and work through some very practical pathways in how these things can be delivered with Australian expertise and partnership. From Lane, I think, you know, a very interesting concept around Australia being the region's carbon bank. And I think, you know, what can Australia provide to the region? Certainly we need to consider those core strengths as well. And then I think, you know, finally from John, for me, you know, the need for a framework and confidence, I think, are the two key things that I drew out of your response to the question in particular. You know, if we have a clear framework, we need to ensure that our language and our motivation and our approach to things is done in the correct manner so that we actually have the confidence to enable our communities to invest and enable them to focus appropriately on the outcomes. Thank you, Whitney.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you, Adi. Thanks very much. And we will now be moving on to the next panel.
Pleasure.